I gave a talk to some college students who knew nothing about bees, but they were part of a bio club, and they blew up pictures of a bee's head and put the head on a stick. And so every time I said beeple, they would hold this picture up in front of their faces. So I'd be looking out at an audience of giant bee heads. So I thought you might appreciate that. It was pretty cute.
That's good.
So next slide. Yeah. So yeah, I'm Kristy Lynn Allen, and I run a business called The Bee's Knees that I started in 2010. And in the upper left-hand corner, it's kind of one of the things that I'm known for, as I invented a pedal-powered honey extractor. And on the right is a picture of me on a rooftop where for several years, I still do a little bit of it. It's hard with COVID because of a lot of the places are closed to the public. And so rethinking this program, but we keep bees on rooftops, and then we harvest the honey by the zip code, and partner with museums and universities and food cooperatives to do this work. But I started the business in 2010. You can go to next slide. As a result of working for my aunt and uncle, who are commercial beekeepers, and they're migratory, so they come to your neck of the woods every winter. But they're up in way northern Minnesota, so pretty close to the Canadian border. And the honey production is really good in the summer, and then they move their bees to almond pollination in the right around November, December is when they start to move them out. But my first experience in a beehive was with a commercial beekeeping operation, although I didn't really want to go down that road just because of the amount of heavy equipment, and I kind of wanted to spend more time with bees. And almond pollination is a really interesting industry and can be really hard on the bees depending on what goes on there. So, but I thought it was really fascinating. And the first time I opened a beehive, maybe some of you have a similar story, I was just absolutely in love. Like I wanted to do this not only as, a part of my life, but I wanted to make a business out of it. And so in I think it was the fall of, it was around Halloween so we're coming up on my 10-year anniversary. My aunt asked if I'd like to sell their honey in Minneapolis, and I had just come back from a trip in Ecuador where I was working with beekeepers there, but my goal was to be a vegetable farmer. But the minute I found bees, I was like, oh, this is way better. So anyway, she asked if I wanted to sell honey, and I had this idea that I would dress up like a bee on Halloween, and I would bike around and deliver or give people honey samples. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see I decided that I would start delivering this honey on bike, and it's really kind of very humble beginnings of how I started doing this work. And it was really, a humble 29-year-old woman getting on a bike and dressing up like a bee and getting a lot of attention. But in 2010, some of you may remember, especially where I live, bees were becoming very popular in the news because of colony collapse, and a lot of people really wanted to save the bees and help the bees. And I saw an opportunity using my bicycle to just raise awareness about not only my business, but about the bees and their connection to our food system. So that picture on the right, that day it was, I think, -5 degrees, where you really don't want much skin exposed as you're biking around. I did this for several years, year round, which was great. I look back at it and it feels crazy, but it was really, really great. Go to the next slide. So that was the first part of the business. And then in 2012, I met an educator and we got a couple grants and we started working with kids, just exposing them to bees and bringing them into the hive and talking about, don't be afraid of bees. They're really good for us and they do these things for us. And I worked with that woman for a couple years and that's how we started putting hives in the city. And then she moved on to start her own nonprofit. And my goal continued to be a full-time professional beekeeper. So next slide. So I started this program called the Urban Apiaries Program, where those host sites that I mentioned before, museums, schools, universities, would pay me, and they still do, annually, kind of like a landscaper, to be their beekeeper. And then I would keep the honey and harvest it, and then people would buy honey from their particular zip code. Next slide. So that's just a shot of the jars of honey and the tag, the marketing that I used to get people. I called it Honey Appelis Wildflower Zip Sourced Honey, and the name of the institution or organization would be on there, and then the zip code. You can, next slide. I also, my first set of hives, my uncle gave me a couple nukes, 5-frame nukes that I kept them on a farm in 2010 out in western Wisconsin. And so I didn't start out with very many hives. I was working full-time at a restaurant and on a farm, and then building my business as I went. So I literally peddled my way into a future of just driving a lot, because I now have about 150 hives. And our bordering state, Wisconsin, it's just about an hour away, where there is a very large network, very lovely network of small organic farmers that are about my age. And it's been really wonderful to work with them. And actually, I'm coming to you now from western Wisconsin, where I eventually bought a little farm and live now. Next slide. And this is it's a picture of me at one of my teaching apiaries, which I'll talk about in a minute. I also started a program called Camp Bees Knees, where I give each person a hive of their own to manage, but I'm there to guide them through the process. So it's 12 sessions, 2-hour sessions, where they're starting out. Most would be brand new, but there'd be some people who had 2, 3, 4, or 5 years experience that just really needed that guided help. And that program's been really, really wonderful. Next slide. This is just a shot of the products. So along the way, I started also making some value-added mustards. My partner is a chef, and so he came on, and we started making some really nice handcrafted mustards. Next slide. And this is a shot of the bees that we do keep. Over the years, I've been working with several other smaller scale beekeepers, so sideline beekeepers that keep 50 to 100 hives, and we've been exchanging local queen stock and learning and working with each other to do hygienic testing. Many of you, or maybe some of you, have heard of Dr. Marla Spivak, she runs the University of Minnesota Bee Lab, pretty famous for her work breeding hygienic bees. She won a MacArthur Genius Award. Both of the guys pictured in those shots have worked at the Bee Lab, and I met them working at the Bee Lab one summer. It's a pretty big influential part of the beekeeping community here, and you know, we learned how to do hygienic testing to make sure the queens that we were propagating had that hygienic behavior as a part of what they did. Next slide. That's just a picture of being really excited as a result of some of the queens that had really, really nice brood patterns and performed very well for us in northern climates. Next shot. And this is a picture of something you probably don't see a lot of a winter. This is a normal Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin. This is actually at my farm in Wisconsin. You'll see the electric fence. There are a lot of black bear where I am. I've managed to keep them at bay so far, but fingers crossed. I've had a few bear attacks, and the bees are never the same after that. But this just shows you that, you know, all the beekeeping work focus moment. So all of our management is to get them through really hard winters. And we have different things to think about as a result that I can talk about a little bit later. Next slide. This is another shot just of what our winter beekeeping looks like. And over the years, you know, we've taken lessons from Mike Palmer and some Vermont beekeepers who have a similar climate that I've applied using divided deeps and things like that. But I really like the picture on the left. It shows a very big, healthy cluster of bees in the middle of winter. And it's incredible to see what the bees can endure, you know, like temps of -10, 20, and you're just losing your mind all winter, like worried about them, but they are, you know, they manage it. So next slide. Just a shot of using some infrared, showing it's a really cool way to see which hives are still alive in the winter time, and what temp is inside the hive, and how big the cluster is and where it's at is a really, and I'm sure that maybe you're familiar with this if anybody in the group does cutouts in homes. This is a really good way to find out where the bees are at with the infrared. Next slide. Just backing up a little bit, in 2013, so I started the business in 2010, but I didn't have a place, like a honey house or anywhere to extract honey. I would do it, you know, work with my uncle and sell his honey, but when I started getting more hives, I needed a place of my own. And in 2013, we launched a Kickstarter and raised $40,000 to renovate a space. And that also helped us develop the pedal-powered honey extractor, what I call the honey cycle. So this is just a picture of the inside of my shop that I currently still operate in Minneapolis. And this is a bunch of college kids coming to help us with honey extraction. And I think it's always weird this time of like the COVID times to see a lot of people in one indoor space, but yeah, those were different times. Okay, next slide. And this is the bee's knees honey cycle. So basically, when I first started out, I was given a broken hand crank extractor, and I don't know how many of you have had hand crank extractors where that top mechanism, the plastic breaks on it or whatever. So for a while, I was just using a drill and I would spin it that way, and that was very inefficient. And then being a huge cyclist in Minneapolis, I was well connected with the bike community. So I literally paid a friend of mine in beer to come up with a honey cycle that we, over the next 5-6 years, developed. We have I have 5 different generations that we went through. So every year we kind of improved something on it. If you go to the next slide. I was featured in Forbes magazine, which was pretty exciting for this invention. Some women entrepreneurs found me and came and took photos and stuff like that. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, and I talk about my 6-pack of beer investment there. Next slide. So this just this is actually taken this year. I still harvest all my honey up to 5,000 pounds a year using pedal power. So pretty stubborn in that I want to continue to use this machine. But it actually works really well. The whole thing tilts forward. It's really easy to clean, and it's really easy for any age or body type to use, because your legs are way stronger than your body, and you know those hand crank extractors shake quite a bit, and this provides a really fun, engaging way. And we actually, during COVID, I mean, since 2013, we would invite beekeepers in, and they could rent this by the hour. So you'd get your pedal powered extractor, and you'd get the uncapping knife and the tank. You could keep your wax, and then we would just charge by the hour and clean up after them. And this year we're just renting them out for people to take home instead of bringing people into the shop. Next slide. And this is just a picture of the front of my space with the extractor and the equipment that we do rent out now we're almost done here with honey extraction. We only do it once a year for the most part, maybe twice if you're lucky, but our season is very short. And so people, if they're pulling honey right now, it's a little late in the game, but not too terrible. We also have a hot room inside that we use and used to rent out as well, and people could, heat their honey at 90. And it was just an old walk-in cooler that I got for $700 and put a heater in it. It was a pretty good deal. Next slide. So again, just a shot of my business, my shop. We sell honey, and we do classes in there in addition to the honey extraction. Next slide will show you in 2017, we started selling equipment. That was right, the next one. And we partnered with Better Bee out of upstate New York because I really liked the products that they were offering, and the people running that shop are also beekeepers that use a similar style of beekeeping that we do. And Man Lake is actually originally from Minnesota, but they have rules about how close you can be to other suppliers, and so we ended up going with Better Bee. But when I started in 2017, I think it was, or 2016, Brushy Mountain was still around. That was my first supplier, and I got the extractor part of the honey cycle from them, and then they went out of business, and so we went to Better Bee because they have a similar product. Next slide. And this is just, I wanted to share this with you because this has been a challenging year as a business owner in Minneapolis. As you probably have heard about the George Floyd murder and the subsequent riots and unrest, we had to close for a week and board up. It was my shop is really close to where a lot of that was going on, and in addition to COVID, it's been a really hard year for running this kind of shop in the city. But everything, we're getting by, and we put this really beautiful mural. A local artist came and painted that as kind of a reaction to what was going on, and we are we don't let anyone in the store now, but we do online orders, and people can come and pick stuff up. But yeah, it's been an interesting time to be a beekeeper. We also had many honey clients, like restaurants and coffee shops, that we lost because they're not able to function. But we were able to get some money from the county and from the federal government as well. So hanging in there. Next shot. Camp Bee's Knees. So I mentioned this earlier, but I've been teaching this program in conjunction with a few other teachers for 5 years now. And so we started, it can hold up to 10. We put 10 hives in an apiary, and I partner with nature centers in the metro area to host these classes, and the people would come, and you could come with up to 2 other people to make it more affordable, so that you could come with like your grandpa or your, significant other and spend a season with us beekeeping. And the whole teaching behind this was sustainable beekeeping, in that, we want our hives to survive our winters. And so showing people how to start with either a package of bees or nukes, and then bringing them through the season. And what we're teaching is about trying to raise your own queens, but also mite management without using antibiotics. So organic acids, drone comb removal, splitting, that kind of thing, which for a new beekeeper can be overwhelming. And it's been a learning experience as an educator, showing, someone experiencing a beehive for the first time, and there's so much to learn. And then also all the nuances of dealing with mites. And I'm not sure what your mite situation is in your area, but ours has gotten worse every single year, as far as figuring out how to deal with them in the best way without having to treat the bees so much. So that's been a big part of the program. Next slide. And so this is just a shot of us harvesting honey as a class. And it's really great because these students become part of, they'll buy beekeeping equipment, and we form a community and a support group. As you know, beekeeping, you often need a lot of therapy just to talk things over and figure out what's going on. Next slide. And this is just another shot of getting the hives ready for winter. So this is about this time of year, maybe a little bit later, where we wrap them up and make sure that they have enough food to make it through the winter. And then you just cross your fingers and hope they come out the other side. Next slide. This year with COVID, I spread the hives out even further apart. So everyone was 6 feet. I wasn't sure whether to hold the classes, but then as we learned more about being outside and the way the virus was transmitting, it seemed to be an okay thing as long as everyone was masked, and you're in a beekeeping suit already and you're wearing gloves. And so it turned out to be a really nice, I think, those who signed up, our attendance was way down, I think, because everyone was nervous, but the people who did come really, really appreciated having that opportunity when so many other things were not open to them. So that was a really cool thing to be able to provide this year. Next slide. My beekeeping operation changed tremendously when I started raising my own queens. And I heard you talking about Melanie Kirby. I actually went to Jamaica on a beekeeping trip, and we stayed in the same homestay. So I got to spend a couple weeks with Melanie. She's wonderful and incredibly knowledgeable and talented with queen rearing. And it's an intimidating thing to get into, but once you get into it, you realize how vital it is to successful beekeeping, I think. And one of Melanie's good friends, Megan Mahoney, who's also a queen breeder, she taught me how to draw little hearts on the backs of queens. So thought I would share that picture. Next slide. One of the other things I like to present about and kind of brought us into a wider audience of beekeeping and sort of our mission of keeping healthy bees and healthy lives was a result of, we were victim to pesticide kills in the city. And it's a really, I think the story, especially with everything going on in the world right now, really helps me understand how important it is to get involved on issues that really affect us as beekeepers. So we were part of an incident in 2013 where 3 hives within a quarter mile of each other experienced a pesticide kill. And you can see by the picture on the right, all the dead bees in front. And I don't know if anyone has ever had this happen to you, but it's really horrible. And as newer beekeepers in 2013, and being young and really optimistic about making change in the world, we took action and we formed a campaign called Healthy Bees, Healthy Lives. Next slide. And one of the people that was also a victim to this her name was Catherine Sill. And the reason we found out about this pesticide kill was because she came to extract her honey at our honey house, this community beekeeping center. And we told her to go put her super back on the hive for a couple days to clean out all the remaining honey so she could store it. And when she returned, she found a bunch of dead bees in front of her hive. I think it's on the next slide, a picture of her hive. Yeah, and so you can see a before and an after, and so she called us and was really upset. She called the bee lab and Dr. Marla Spivak, and then we had a hive very near there, so we went out and checked, and sure enough, so everything kind of changed after that incident. You can go to the next slide. Our hive was at a school for kids, which is really concerning if something's being sprayed that heavily and killing that many bees. You know, you have kids around too. Next slide. And so being in Minneapolis, you know, and being a beekeeper and starting out during, you know, kind of the height of the awareness of the decline, we knew that these were the main reasons for bee decline were lack of forage pesticides and then the diseases and pests that they get. But the misuse and overuse of pesticides, we thought we needed to do something about it. Next slide. So we started this campaign called Healthy Bees, Healthy Lives. And in the middle of January, when it's very cold, we had 120 people show up. And we had some local politicians come, and Marla spoke. And it was really, there was a ton of energy behind this. Next slide. And we went, this was my first experience kind of going to the Capitol and testifying in front of a bunch of suits. And I did dress like a bee, and we even got the some of the corn grower lobbyists to wear yellow ties, which seemed to mean that we were on the right track. Next slide. And we planned a big party called the Dandelion Honey Pastry Chef Challenge, and that down there on the left was the mayor at the time. He came and spoke, and we had a bunch of famous people. And my uncle, where he's at, he can get a really nice dandelion honey, and so we invited chefs, pretty well-known chefs from around the city, and challenged them to make pastries using dandelion honey as their only sweetener. Next slide. And part of the event was also getting people to join our campaign of Healthy Bees, Healthy Lives. So taking a pollinator pledge and advocating for policies. These yard signs started to show up all over the city, and then also just encouraging people to think about what they buy and put on their lawns before they did that. Next slide. And believe it or not, we were successful in passing 2 pollinator protection laws. Minnesota is one of the leading bee protection states in the country now, and I feel like we were a part of that, which is really great. So 2 bills passed. One was a beekeeper compensation bill. So if we were to ever have a pesticide kill again, we would get compensated for the loss of our dead bees. And the second bill, next slide. Oh, I don't have it on there, but we passed 2 bills, and one of them was a truth in advertising bill where nurseries couldn't label plants as bee friendly if they had neonicotinoids or bee toxic chemicals on them. And so those laws passed in 2014, and then I had another pesticide kill on my hives as a result of corn planting. So up here in the Midwest, the large majority of acreage is field corn or soybeans, and corn is 90% of the seed is coated with neonicotinoids, and when they plant, they drill the seed in the ground and the dust comes up from the seeds. And it was so strong one day that it killed a lot of my bees in an apiary. So once again, we went back, and actually the law that we advocated for, next slide, we were the first beekeepers to benefit from it. So I actually went through another investigation with the Department of Agriculture, and we were compensated for the loss of those bees. Now it took 9 months and a whole lot of work in order for that to happen. And then they ended up the next year changing the law, weakening it, making it harder to prove that your bees had been killed by pesticides, and B, you had to register with a program called Drift Watch that you voluntarily put the location of your hives, and an applicator is supposed to not spray. Well, that doesn't really help you if it's from corn planting. So it was, it's a very good lesson in the way that government kind of pushes back and forth that way. Next slide. So yeah, that's the weakening. They also weakened the nursery labeling law. So if it contains low levels, it can still be labeled as bee friendly, but a lot of what we're learning about the toxicity of pesticides and kind of the sublethal doses can be really hard on bees' immune systems and things like that. Next slide. So again, every year after that, this is 2016, we testified. Next slide. 2017, I like to show this photo. The guy I'm sitting next to is a commercial beekeeper from Iowa who lost 500 hives in 2 counties as a result of this corn planting. So he was really an amazing person to have with us, because he was also a corn farmer, and he now, for 50 years, he's been growing corn, and also he's a Russian bee breeder. So he is certified Russian bee breeder, has an incredible amount of knowledge and incredible bees for raising winter hardy bees here in the Midwest. His name is Manly Bagul, and he's from Golden Ridge Honey. And they winter all their bees in Iowa as well. So next slide. That pastry chef challenge we continued to do as we were lobbying the whole time. So for 4 years, we had these events. They were all really wonderful and fun. And then I stopped doing them last year, and COVID would have put an end to them anyway. So it's probably good. But we started connecting it to healthy water as well. Next slide. And the other thing we did is we tried to make it easier for people to plant pollinator-friendly flowers. And so we invented these pollinator patch kits where, if you go to the next slide, I think it shows, yeah, so it's like a raised bed shaped like a hexagon, and then people would get a gift card to a local pollinator-friendly nursery, and then you could plant these in your yard. And the city of Minneapolis actually purchased 160 of them from us, and so they're all over the city now, which is pretty cool. Next slide. So the most recent, there are some, you know, even I think more recently than this, but state of Minnesota formed a committee to get recommendations on what we can do more for pollinators. And this year they awarded people a tax rebate if they converted their entire yard to pollinator habitat. So that was a really cool thing to happen towards the end of our campaign as far as doing pollinator work. Next slide. So that's kind of my story and the story of Bee's Knees and what we do here. I like to end with this picture and challenge beekeepers to tell me why are there a bunch of bees underneath my radio? And it's not because David Bowie was playing. Anybody know? No? Okay, so I got a couple queens from a friend of mine, and we were just talking outside my truck, and I had put the queens underneath there's like a little slot underneath the radio. It's an old truck. And we were talking for like 15, 20 minutes. And I got in my truck and it was just covered I drove home like that with all those those bees. They're really nice, strong queens. So that's how that happened. Yeah. So I'll take any questions any of you have. I'm happy to talk about the work we did or northern beekeeping and the different, I know it's pretty different than the way that you all keep bees. But not, you know, they're bees, right? But the climate asks for different things.
Can you talk a little about your treatment strategies?
Yeah, so this year, so in managing as many hives as I do, in the springtime, you know, I'm checking for mites every 3 weeks from April to August. And then August and September every 2 weeks, because that's when our season really stops. You know, the pollen slows down, the nectar slows down, and the bees stop reproducing, and so the mite numbers go up. But my treatment program is a combination of, you know, testing and then using formic acid only when it's above threshold. So, you know, the threshold that we've been advised from the Bee Informed Partnership is at three mites per 100 bees. And the mites generally around here, because we have such a long brood break from winter, the mites aren't terrible as long as you took care of them the year before. They're pretty low until July or August, but you do have some surprises of hives that will end up higher in May or June. So, you know, treat any hives that are above threshold, but if they're not above threshold, then I just split them and do an exolic dribble with a queen cell if I'm making new hives. So doing the dribble on day 19. And then continuing to just test and treat as necessary, but really it's not treatment focused. It's more trying to identify the hives that can withstand and get through a season with lower mites. And I've been having a lot of conversations with, have you heard of Dr. Megan Milbrath out of Michigan? So, yes. Yeah, she's someone I've worked closely with in, you know, trying to raise and work with local bee stock and and all that. And we've been talking a lot about the threshold. Has it changed? Or we've been seeing these numbers spike a lot, especially in the fall after treatments. And so, none of us want to treat our bees until we're, crazy in the head and spending lots of money on it. But at the same time, I think it's still being determined, or at least it seems to me, what is the actual threshold, because some colonies can get through having higher mites and some just fall apart. So anyway, to answer your question, and then I do drone comb removal all season. I feed the drones to my chickens and they really, really love that. I don't know if anyone has that chicken bee relationship, but I think it's pretty great. And then again, just identifying which queens do the best and trying to propagate from those queens. Yeah.
People have questions?
I was just curious about the spinner. Does it have gears?
It does not have gears, but once it's a freewheel. So once you get it going, that it'll just, it actually, if you bike too fast, you'll wreck your comb because it spins it really, really fast. So we tried to gear it that 3 revolutions on your feet are 8 in the extractor. So it really, you don't have to pedal very hard at all. Yeah. No need for gears.
What's the cost of the extractor?
So the whole thing is $2,000, and we fabricate everything here. The year I released it to the public was the year the steel trade war happened. So the price, I haven't made a new batch since then. So to make them even that affordable, I had to make several, and that's the last time I made a batch. So to be honest, I have to go back and find a fabricator and figure out what the new cost would be. But I think it'll remain at that price. Also, when Brushy Mountain went out of business, the company that they were getting, there's this compact extractor and it has a filter built into it.
Can you turn it down a little, hon?
So finding that particular, once Brushy Mountain closed, the relationship with that Italian company, it just kind of went away. And so Better Bee works with Lyson extractors, and they have a similar one, except that one I have to sort of do a little redesigning. But that's a long answer to your question.
Okay.
Can I ask the question? Sorry, I'm a little tardy to the party, but just out of curiosity, I heard that you spoke a little bit about queen rearing, and I'm curious about your breeding methodologies. Do you do like open breeding? Like, how do you were talking about discarding some of your drone brood, but I imagine maybe you wouldn't when you're trying to propagate your queens. So maybe
so I'm building that portion of my operation. So haven't focused a ton on drone propagation yet, but I know I'm finding out and working with people that are doing it in the area how important it is. So next year I plan to, the colonies that I really like or the genetics, set up a more intentional hive that I raise a lot of drones out of. So kind of flood the apiary, but I don't do any artificial insemination. And I think Melanie, I don't know if Melanie does or not. Maybe you all know better than that. I don't think she does, but Megan Mahoney she's actually got a SARE grant last year to do artificial insemination, and they do some of it at the U of M Bee Lab. And Dr. Marla Spivak is actually working on breeding another bee that is mite resistant but also develops a lot of propolis and is winter hardy. I don't know what kind of, you have drought or times of no forage, right? Like, what is your dearth season? Or do you have several, right?
Well, basically our dearth season, we're going through it right now. We've been going through it. In theory, it starts in probably late July
Mm-hmm.
and we'll go through till, but the last few years out here have been so good that we still have bees bringing in pollen. And so
Oh, that's
we've
great.
been hurt considerably this year by the fires and the smoke.
Yeah, are they not foraging? Is it too much smoke? I've heard.
Yeah, when you get a lot of smoke, the bees can't navigate to the sun and the imaging that they get from the sun, so they don't tend to go out
Yeah.
as far. I notice in my bee yards, the bees are hardly flying at all. The only things that I really see flying a lot are the tankers going from the hives over to my watering source and then back home again.
Right.
When you look at the hives, you just see a bunch of bees sitting around. They're either bearding on the front or they're just hanging out at the entrance rather
Interesting.
than flying. So it's bizarre.
I mean, I imagine if they're not really foraging, but I wonder if the honey would taste smoky at all. Like if you're enveloped in that much smoke, probably not, huh?
No, because it's pretty much protected inside the hives. No one,
Yeah.
I don't know, has anybody here had any problems with smoky honey? No, not really. Of course, I know seriously, in my bee yards here at the house, I haven't taken that much honey out. I
Yeah.
tend to be pretty conservative about it, especially when they can't forage like they haven't of late.
Kristy, you mentioned a correlation or a combination with the chickens and the bees. We
Mhm.
have friends that have chickens, and they had a picture of the eggs before the fires and then after the fires. Before, they looked just nice and light brown, and after the eggs were smoky on the outside.
The
She
chicken
said
eggs?
the chicken
Yeah.
egg.
Wow.
So,
Weird.
They said they tasted okay, but that that was one of the things that happened with the smoke, that was affecting. So,
Wow.
Kristy, I got a question for you. I was very interested in when you talked about some of the legislation with the corn planters, because I had just finished reading, I guess it was last month's in the Bee Journal. They had talked about the coating on the seeds and stuff like that. And it was one of the things that I was wondering about in our area, because I'm not sure if the farmers in our area do that. And I know that there is a fine line between, the new way to farm, with the seeds propagating a lot faster, being a lot more disease resistant, as far as on the farmer's end. But I wasn't aware, this particular article talked about the pros and the cons to it. And it's the first time actually I'd heard of that. And then having you talk about it really sparked my curiosity, because I didn't really get a very good grasp on that particular article.
Yeah.
Until listening to you talk about it, because I think that particular article talked more about the difference between spraying or coating seeds and how it affected the bees.
Yeah. So I know that the seed coating was developed because it's less toxic to the applicator, right? So like instead of an aerial spray, and it's supposed to be more targeted. And I think, after what happened to us, there was a lot of conversations about how they can do it so it's less toxic to bees. But part of the problem is, even though it may be less toxic to human beings, it's ending up in our water as well, and it doesn't break down really. And so the sublethal effects of it are also concerning. I know that in talking to a lot of experts and other beekeepers about pesticide issues, fungicides actually tend to be harder on the bees than say neonics, but the combination of all these chemicals out in the landscapes is seeming to have the most impact on the bees too. But yeah, it's really concerning, and I don't, it's been a little while since I've checked in with it, but I know they were also trying to figure out how to eliminate the dust, right? So like make the chemicals stick on the seed more so that when you do drill it in, it doesn't kind of come out.
So is that what you guys were experiencing though? The dust
Yeah.
from the seeds being drilled in?
Yeah, and actually the landowner where I was keeping the hives, who also had bees, they saw the farmer in the middle of the day planting and it was windy. So he also wasn't following, the guidelines of applying. But regardless, they came out and took samples and they found incredibly high levels all, in the dandelions and flowers around the field as well. So it's affecting other pollinators and other organisms.
Yeah, I guess that was a part of the article that I didn't really understand too much, and because I wasn't aware that the drilling of the seed actually created the dust. I was under the impression that it was the coating on the seed that traveled through the plant and then came out on the heads of the corn that the bees might collect the pollen to, that might have an effect on them.
That also happens. So, because it is a systemic pesticide, so it's going to come out, and hence the nursery labeling law, where nursery growers were growing bee-friendly plants that were giving these doses of that pesticide. So, in any application, it doesn't seem to be a great thing. An interesting thing that happens here, and it's been hard to find the correlation, but we're having a lot of problems with European fall brood, especially in the springtime. And it seems to be connected to the time when a lot of farmers or growers are using pesticides. And I, like doing studies and finding evidence of this is kind of hard, but I've talked to quite a few people about that combination. And commercial beekeepers actually try and wait until after corn planting in the Midwest to bring their bees back so that they avoid that situation. Yeah.
It was kind of a hardcore thing for me, because me and my wife Sarah, this is our first year doing it, but I'm very intrigued with that, because with our corn planting, our sweet corn is mostly late summer. And I think it was just at the last meeting, Randy, right? We were talking about the white pollen that the bees were bringing back, and we were trying to figure where it was coming from, being that it was so late in the year. And then you see all this sweet corn, just down the street off of Leavesley and alongside the freeways, and it's like the final crop of the season.
Yeah.
Sweet corn in California is a big thing, and
yeah.
So then I read this article about the corn. And I'm just like, oh, okay.
I know. It's hard. And I will tell you from experience and from, because we deal with it a lot up here, and they will, if there's nothing else for them, they'll collect corn pollen and bring it back. But if my hives are close to cornfields or surrounded by too many cornfields, those bees just don't do as well. And that's something that's consistent. So most beekeepers up here, they try to get as far away from it with their hives as they can, or at least try and find a pretty significant buffer of trees or, whatever it may be. But bottom line is, you can't tell those bees where to go and where not to go, right? So I've just been moving further north because it's harder to grow corn further north, where it's a lot more rocky and colder.
I guess with us, I was just kind of curious on it, because like I said, I wasn't sure. I guess it would be more of a question to ask, some of the farmer friends of mine, whether or not the corn that they're planting,
Yeah. Well, and I know for a while it was really hard to find corn seed that wasn't treated, and farmers don't want to hurt bees. And I think that and I haven't looked, you should ask them, but I think it's easier to find it than it used to be, because of the problems that beekeepers were facing. But again, I don't really know. And our current, on a federal level, this administration is not real good about environmental protections on living organisms, from what I've seen. And I think a lot of regulations have been pushed back, and I can't speak specifically. I haven't, unfortunately, been following it close enough. I can't speak specifically to the corn issue, but I know it is still a problem for beekeepers up here.
Well, it was very interesting. Thank you for mentioning that, because that article sparked my curiosity, and then you followed up with it. So
yeah.
Just commenting about the seed injectors that the farmers use now to put the seeds in. So they drive a tractor with a GPS running to keep them in a straight line, and then they have these injectors that at every such a specific distance they put a seed in the ground. The trick is that the powder that comes from that is, as I understand it from what I've been told, is they put those seeds in a big bin, and if there's humidity or anything else, the seeds all stick together and jam the injectors. So the powder that's coming out, it's like a talcum powder or some kind of a powder blend that coats the seeds and keeps them from sticking. So when that injector goes in and pulls out, that cloud that's dispersed is actually the material that's separating the seeds and keeping them from jamming up the injectors. The other thing that we did a lot of studying in the Master Gardener classes that I went through was talking about the real harm of neonicotinoids and these seed coatings is the bees will pick up small, minute amounts of the neonics, and so at any one time a bee will get pollen or whatever that comes from this neonic, and the manufacturers will say, well, look, it took it and it didn't kill the bee, so it's obviously okay. The problem is it takes all that load back and puts it into the hive, and then come wintertime, when they have to rely solely on that food, they just get this whole overdose of all these pesticides and these neonics, and that's what's really killing them.
Yeah, and it's interesting too when you see the amount of queen failure, or even the hives that got hit with those pesticides. It didn't kill them all right away. It took until the end of summer, and then they all started superseding their queens, and you're like, well, what is that about?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the other thing I was really interested in, Kristy, in your talk was all the things about education and bringing people in, whether it's setting up classes or just a whole gamut of education, because we've tried education programs, advertising in libraries, and I don't know, do you have any tips on how to make that work? Because we've had two kinds of non-success. We've had programs where nobody showed up, advertising, or we've had programs where a decent number of people show up and they're all enthusiastic, and then that's the last you ever see of them. So
yeah, I don't know, maybe it's a Midwestern thing. No, I'm just
you can say that. That's okay. We're California. We're different. We know that.
No, I joke because there's a woman, I don't know if you know her name's Jennifer Radke, who has been working in the Bay Area. She actually teaches bee classes there still, but she moved, and she works with Randy Oliver. So she sells a lot of Randy Oliver's queen bees, and she used to co-run a biofuel oasis. So she lives here now and has been working for me periodically and teaching assist in these classes. And she's just got a different, canter about her beekeeping, and I joke she's from California, even though she's from Milwaukee originally. But the way that I'm trying to think, it's been 5 years, and I'm also competing against the best bee lab in the country as far as trying to get people to take my classes over a genius, essentially. but they've been really helpful. Marla, I actually know Dr. Marla Spivak pretty well, and she helped push people towards our program based on the hands-on portion. I think that's what makes it really, and you've probably done this, but the way that everybody pays for the class in the beginning. So, we charge $600 for 12 sessions. So it's really, and they're 2-hour sessions. So it's like $40 a 2-hour class, which is not that bad. But I don't really know what tips to tell you, except that, I think the scope of it, as far as like, you're going to get a full season experience and really get to be, a beekeeper, but have the help that you need, the hands-on help. And marketing, I guess, some people say that I have a little knack for it. So, the way you present your flyer, or, just using social media, I guess has helped me a lot. But the classes, I think also when I started, interest in beekeeping was really, really high. And not that it's not high still, but it doesn't feel quite as, the fervor has sort of waned a little bit, I guess. And yeah, but I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Oh, I'd kind of like to get Arthur, any comments on that? Questions?
Like, what have you done? What have you advertised, or what have you had before?
We've advertised intro to beekeeping courses, and Sarah and I have done some courses at the local libraries, and sometimes the turnout's pretty decent, and then sometimes we're just talking to other members of the club.
Yeah.
So it's hit or miss. And by the way, Kristy, I want to say thank you for accepting our invitation.
Sure. Yeah.
To come and speak. I didn't mean to sound desperate in the emails.
Everybody sounds desperate about something right now. It's okay. I would say, yeah, I think that do you have a teaching, a place where you could have multiple hives and bring people to the hives?
Yes.
You do. Yeah.
Yes.
I would say, I think it's one thing to show someone a video. It's another thing to do like a lecture at a library, but it's a totally different experience, when you can get them in front of the hives. And I can, I can tell you what to not do in that situation and what to do. After 5 years, lots of things can happen. Don't let people bring their dogs. That's a terrible thing. I could tell you stories about that. And always make sure that they provide a beekeeping suit. We would rent the suits as well. So I invested in quite a few beekeeping suits, and then we would charge for them to rent it for the season, and then they could buy it at the end or give it back to us. But yeah, I don't know I think the hands-on is really what sold us, for sure.
And we were really looking forward to, I thought we had a great turnout for Sarah and Arthur's first one that they had, and we were actually really looking forward to the hands-on one, which was next before the whole COVID thing happened.
Yeah.
And so I can really, as beginning beekeepers, me and Sarah were very excited about the hands-on one, because we actually, because of the COVID stuff, our first hands-on was our bees in our backyard, the first time cracking them open with nobody there.
School of hard knocks.
So
yeah, did you get stung a bunch?
No, we actually did really well. Our bees were pretty good, but
yeah, those gentle California bees.
Oh, absolutely, yes. But
Happy bees.
yeah,
Yeah.
Bees.
Yeah.
So
We
but,
have these very ornery Russian bees that are really good at defending themselves. No, they're not all like that, but
Bit funny.
yeah, I think you can still do. I mean, you have the luxury of, you know, temperate climate year round, so you can still do some hands-on with COVID. And I will say, you know, as long as you're very clear about the rules as far as keeping distance and keeping your mask on, you know, you could still do them. Just don't, you know, like have fewer people in them, or yeah.
Hey, Kristy, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Just by virtue of your location,
Yeah.
I'm curious about your overwintering practices. Like, is there any changes in like how frequently you requeen? Do you do anything special to take care of your bees over the winter?
Mm-hmm.
I know that, you know, you want to make sure that you don't crack things when it's really cold, you know, crack the hive open when it's really cold out. But I don't know if you have any guidance about when you do or when you don't.
Yeah, so ideally, you know, and there's always an ideally in beekeeping. Ideally, if your hive swarms after, like our main honey flow is in early July, right? So if you don't keep your hives from swarming and they swarm after July, it can be really challenging because you need the big population. But they can still come through. So like making sure that your hives in August and September, the hard work is, you know, addressing the mite issue. If they go into winter with a lot of mites, it's generally not going to work for you. As far as queens go, what I've been getting into and I'm really excited about and trying to teach newer beekeepers to start out with nucleus colonies, for a number of reasons. One, here, you know, we have, you're probably going to lose hives over the winter, even if you're a really good beekeeper. It just happens, right? And so what we'll do is during the main honey flow, or like right before it, we start nukes. We do splits and then overwinter them in the nuke. So just a small, and you'd be surprised what bees can get through in that small setup. And I think it's because they're able to regulate the heat in that, you know, the size of their population and within that smaller unit. But even where you're at, I would encourage people to play around with nukes, because you can really learn a lot just by observing the bees in those smaller colonies. And maybe you already do that. But to answer your question, so it's having some backup colonies, smaller units, and then the production colonies, making sure that queen, because generally speaking, you know, you're going to make a lot of honey with a second year queen, but you're also going to end up with a lot of mites. So like last year we had kind of a mild winter, and then the bees woke up sooner, and we had an incredible honey year. And so they had more brood cycles, and so they had more mite issues. In that case, I did a lot more splitting and identified the queens that are a little bit older, and take those queens out and put them in the nuke, and then put a new queen in that bigger colony. But as you might have seen in the pictures, just logistically, wrap them in some sort of black, I use tar paper just because it's cheap and I have a lot of hives, and I can reuse it for quite a while. And that just keeps the really crazy winter winds that we have. So it's not the cold that kills the bees, it's the wind, and if they're not able to maintain the heat of that cluster. We also put insulation on top, so that keeps the heat because the bees are only heating the cluster, they're not heating the whole box. And so if you can keep that heat in, that's another thing that we put on top. But yeah, you can see the tar paper, and then in some of the photo of the tallest hive, you'll see there's a mouse guard. We have to keep the mice out of the colonies. So actually in my management this week will be putting mouse guards on, because they'll just straight up move in and then start eating your bees and your comb, and it sucks. We also keep the entrances really small, and there's new research coming out by Dr. Tom Seeley about just having one entrance open during the winter, but we were always taught one on the bottom and one on the top for ventilation, because if that heat from that cluster produces condensation and then drips down on them, and if it, like, the moisture can't escape out that top entrance, then that can kill the bees. But Tom Seeley is arguing that the bees need the moisture that is produced in order to hydrate through the winter. So as you know, in beekeeping, there's always conflicting information, but I've had no problems getting bees through the winter with the top and the bottom hole. The other thing, you know, depending on the fall nectar flow, it can be a little shaky here. So we have to feed one, you know, certain colonies will have to feed up to weight. And we've figured out that a 2-deep colony needs to weigh, like equipment, bees, everything has to weigh 150 pounds in order to get through winter. And it can be like 130 to 150. So sometimes we just go around and weigh the colonies in September or at the end of the fall flow, and then feed them up to that weight, just to make sure. But in local queen rearing, I'm also trying to identify hives that you don't have to feed at all. And generally those are those Russian line or Caucasian, Eastern European genetics that keep the bees know to be more conservative with what they're eating. And I've had a lot of Italian bees. When I first started, I would get California bees, and like in September, they would have no honey stores at all. Like they would just be breeding and continuing to eat, and I'm continuing to feed. So I got rid of all my California bees, sorry.
And then do you ever use those support hive models where you have multiple nukes partnered within a space to conserve and share?
Yeah, so we call them duplexes, and we built these boxes where there's a divider in the middle. It's something we learned from Michael Palmer. And I've had really good success with those, actually, and it's an interesting way to beekeep, less equipment, 2 hives in one side. It can be a little tricky because you have to, you know, put them in normal equipment in the springtime. But it really does work. And I wish I would have included, last year, I took all of my hives, and no matter what hive style, I put them together, as close together as I could get them. And in some areas I put up a wall, so a wind break, but I really like the buddy system. It feels cozy to me, and the bees seem to do pretty well. It's interesting, the ones in the middle will always need food, and this makes sense, right? Because they're warmer than the ones on the end. So you have to pay attention to the ones on the middle don't warm up faster and eat through their stores. And you can actually do some damage. I have on my property like a old horse barn that's open on one side, and it's south facing, so the sun really shines in there. And I wrapped all my bees in that black tar paper, and then I put them in there out of the wind in the sun, and they didn't do very well. And I think it's because they were too warm, like they couldn't regulate their temp, but also they'd come out when it was way too cold, and then they wouldn't get back in. So you don't want to overdo it either. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions, anybody? No? Well, Kristy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. It was very, very educational.
Okay.
Very educational.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good luck with
It's
your
awesome.
bees. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right.